Hello, wonderful people at the internet. Today I'm going to be reviewing Sourcery, which is the 5th book in the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so I am currently reading, in between other books that I'm reading, Discworld books in chronological order. So I did dip my toes into Discworld previously, and I've read quite a few that are out of chronological order. I've read like the 11th one and the 20th one. I've jumped around a bit, and I was reading, I think, the 13th one called Small Gods, when I sort of realised that I felt like I was missing out on a lot, because this is set in a country called Clatch and there's a lot of movement between it, and I just felt like this was a country that had already been set up and things like that, and probably already had jokes associated with it that I wouldn't understand if I hadn't read the books before it, even though you don't have to. Because I'm a completionist, I was like, no, I have to understand everything said in these books. And so now I'm reading it chronologically. 5th book, Sourcery. Now, I'm just going to begin by saying I went into this book with my expectations on the floor. This is like 3.9 stars on Goodreads, which is really bad for a Discworld book. This is below average. And so I thought, I can understand how Terry Pratchett could maybe not be so good. But I know that I was not the biggest fan of The Light Fantastic, which was kind of my least favourite Pratchett book. Either that or More, although I did like a lot. I did really like bits of more so than I liked the whole of Light Fantastic, if that makes sense. But because this had a similar rating to at least the Light Fantastic, I thought, I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about this. This might be a bit of a slog. And then I read it, and now it is my favourite of all the Discworld books that I have read so far in chronological order. Favourite is still Reaper Man, but this is my favourite in chronological order now. So, what is this about? This is about this fella, who is called Rincewind, who was the main character in the first 2 books. His defining trait in the first 2 books is more so that he's a bad wizard. He's not good at doing magic, rather than his cowardice, so that was kind of a big part of him. But in this book, the focus is more on his identity as a wizard, in the fact that he's not very good at magic, and also his cowardice feels like it plays a lot more, at least into dialogue. Maybe his actions are still as influenced by cowardice, but in the dialogue he has with people, there was a lot of funny moments with his cowardly side. It's about him, but what's really happening is the 8th son of an 8th son has been born, and that means there is a sorcerer. And the sorcerer is basically a source of magic, like raw magic, that into the world. So all of this magic, with the sorcerer, comes pouring into the world and cause all sorts of havoc, and that's what this is about, by and large. I don't want to go too into it, because the back was really vague about it. It was like, there's a sorcerer, he's going to make magic, and that causes problems, and that's all I knew going in, so I don't want to ruin that for people, at least in the premise, before I go into spoilers, because a lot of the enjoyment I got from this book was discovering what was going on rather than having clear expectations. So I guess you could say that the crappy blurb actually did a pretty good job. But we're getting to spoilers now, so if you're reading Discworld, if you want to read Discworld, if you think if this sounds like your cup of tea, you want to pick up Sourcery, then click off now, because I really can't emphasise enough how much I enjoyed this book knowing nothing about it, and I want you to have the same experience. Okay, so, a bit more detail. This sorcerer, his dad was about to be claimed by death. Well, no, he was going to be killed, but when he got sliced by the scythe, he transferred his soul into his son's staff, and then kind of existed in it as a voice that would tell his son, Coin, the sorcerer, what to do. And so throughout this whole book, Coin is the villain. He's the one causing all these problems and kind of causing the wizards to start an uprising and create sort of conflict. But it's not really him, it's his dad controlling him. And so we'll just go straight into positives. That was such a great thing for me. In a lot of the reviews I've read, a lot of people didn't like the Coin part of the book. They said it was underdeveloped. A lot of people said this with the wizard side of Reaper Man as well. But I really liked this part of the book, and I really liked Coin. I thought, as a villain, because all throughout the book he's cold and he's menacing, and then the moment he kind of realises how the staff is manipulating him and starts to think for himself, he becomes this really interesting character in that he's never fought for himself before. And so at the end of the book, that's kind of where he is. He's just learning, where he is and what he wants to do with himself. And even though it was like the last 30 pages pretty much when that happened. That was such a nice little thing that happened, and so I was like, wow, I already like this book, but then Terry Pratchett pulled that off with the villain, and I was like, well, I love this, because Pratchett doesn't usually do villains. In fact, in Light Fantastic and Coda of Magic, there were villains, but they didn't stick around for long. In fact, in most of the Discworld books, there are kind of two villains, at least so far. There's either some sort of magical force villain, with like the Red Star in Light Fantastic, or the Reality Sphere, or the Storm Eye, which is what I thought it looked like, even though I don't like Fortnite, in Mort. Or the creatures from the Dungeon Dimensions, which were partially villains in this, and in Weird Sisters as well. You don't usually, at least not yet, get a proper villain who is a person, and I know in future books there are characters like Mr. Teatame in Hogfather, although I wasn't really a big fan of him, but Coin was like the first villain that I've encountered in chronological order so far, or at least the first full narrative villain, and so I'm so happy and surprised with how well it landed, and I know some people didn't like it, but I really liked it, so there we are. Another thing I loved was the way that Rincewind bounced off the characters around him. Now, I always liked Rincewind and I thought he was funny, but in this book, I now love Rincewind, and he's going to be a character that I look forward to following more in the future. But he is playing off with some really fun characters who are a Konina, who is the daughter of one of my favourite characters in the previous books, Cohen the Barbarian, who is this old hero who hasn't retired yet, and so she's his daughter. But she wants to be a hairdresser, not a barbarian, and so it's her kind of conflicting with her two sides, like the urge to fight in all these situations, but also her not wanting to, and her wanting to be peaceful. She kind of fell off in the last quarter of the book. She kind of, once another character called Nigel was introduced, she kind of stopped being important because there were now 3 characters instead of 2 with her and Rincewind. And so it becomes then harder to manage, understandably, and so she kind of lost a lot of her, she lost a lot of the focus and kind of became a lot less, she had a lot less, she felt like she had a bit less agency, I guess, because she was one of 3 and then one of 4 when Creosote came over as well. But in the first, half, 3/4 of this book, when it was just her and Rincewind, brilliant, because she's really, she's brave and she will run into a fight, and he's like, oh no, and just seeing them play off each other is so funny, and it's what got me through the first half of the book, where there isn't much happening really. It's all about set out for the absolute landslide that is the last half, but that's what got me through, because the comedy was just incredible. Now, the other characters I mentioned, there was Nigel the Destroyer and Creosote. Now, I love these two as well. Nigel is like this wannabe hero who was the source of a lot of jokes and parodies of, tropes in fantasy books. I think he'd only been training for about 3 days before he went on this quest that leads him to encounter Rincewind and Konina on their quest, which is to get the Arch-Chancellor's hat to someone in Clatch so that the sorcerer can't wear it and become even more powerful than he already is. And then there was Creosote, who turned up in the last kind of quarter of the book, so I was wondering who the fella on the cover was that I wasn't able to name, and then I knew. And I actually really liked him. I thought he was funny. He has this thing where he seems aroused by stories, and so there were some innuendos that my dumb sense of humour found really funny. So basically, I really enjoyed Konina. I want her to turn up a bit more and kind of get back the energy that was there in the first half with her. Speaking of side characters, the Librarian, who is a recurring character, kind of like Death, who is an orangutan. He's a librarian who was turned into an orangutan and now wants to stay as an orangutan, and he is one of the major characters in this book. And he was great. It's one of these characters that really astonishes me, like R2-D2 and characters like that, where you're able to convey what they're saying without them saying anything. All the librarian says is ook. Constantly, just ook written out in response to everything. And yet it's incredible how, from the reactions of the other characters, how you can basically tell exactly what they're saying. And he was great in what he did, and in just him being the librarian, because he's one of my favourite characters in the Discworld. And a lot of the parodies in here were also more apparent to me than in the previous books, because I know these are meant to be the parody books, but I never really picked up on them massively. But in this one, definitely I saw where the parodies were happening, like with genies and magic carpets in particular. There's a scene where they're trying to figure out how to fly a magic carpet, and they say up and it doesn't go anywhere. And then Rincewind realises they put it on the floor backwards, upside down, so he says down and it goes up, and that was funny. And they made the genie like some sort of entrepreneur who's tried to, like a real estate agent, which was funny. And I a lot about this book, basically, is what I'm saying. And I felt the stakes were really high. I felt the chaos, I felt the destruction that was occurring as the sorcerer and the wizards were scrapping it out, you know, and as the ice giants woke up and started to destroy the world. I felt it all, my heart was in my mouth, it was so well done, and I really, really enjoyed it. So if we go on to the negatives quickly, I don't want to touch on this too long, but if we just go over. So, it's a lot of the criticisms I heard of this book when I did a bit of research was that it felt a bit unfinished and lopsided, and I can see how you'd feel like that, and I think this is kind of a Reaper Man moment, where there were a whole bunch of things that definitely were problems, and I can see how they'd affect your enjoyment of the book. I feel that by the time that we got to that, I was already invested enough in the characters and the story and enjoying it enough that it didn't bother me. Maybe on a reread it would affect me a bit more, but I was so swept up in the stakes and the plot and the characters that I just didn't really care. And so I think this is kind of unfair of me to speak so highly of it, because with other books that I didn't enjoy as much, then I'd go into their flaws a bit more, but because I liked this book so much, I didn't feel them, and I guess that says a lot about how there can be no objectivity in criticisms and reviews. But yeah, there were like loose ends that weren't properly tied up. Like there was a ring in the vault where they got the genie and the magic carpet. What does the ring do? I thought maybe we would get a payoff for that. We didn't. You know, kind of small things like that. There weren't major things, but there were things that did feel like they were set up and never really paid off. But the main plot, paid off majorly, so that wasn't really an issue for me at least. And then there was some of the characters like Kanina kind of losing their agency and their vibe and becoming more generic as the story went on and the plot took more of the forefront than the characters, if that makes sense. Popping Andrew Garfield back on his positive side, because I just remembered something. Another thing that people didn't seem to like was the characters of Carding and Spelter, who were the two wizards who kind of saw the Sorcerer coin as an opportunity to become more powerful, to manipulate for their own uses. And they both slowly realised throughout the book that they've made mistakes, and Spelter was the first one to do it, and I was enthralled reading this, who I thought would be a minor character, just there for kind of jokes and stuff, start to actually go through the serious development of realising I don't like these changes, I liked it how it was before. And ultimately, we assume he was killed for thinking that. And that really impacted me. I was like, no, this guy, this little thing who grew. I watched him grow out of a character that I thought was going to be really minor into a character that I really cared about, and then he died, and I was devastated, stupidly devastated. And then Carding later on went for a similar thing, and I didn't feel it as much because it had been done already, but even so, I was like, no, another person who's gone through development and died. I felt that there was a lot of development in this book, and actually we'll talk about the themes while we're here. A major theme of this book was identity and who you are, and it came through with Rincewind, who is a bad wizard. He can't do magic, but he still feels like he's a wizard deep down, and gets in quite a lot of arguments when he's like, no, I am a wizard. And I think he said, talent only defines what you do, something like that, and it's just so well done. And it did kind of become a bit on the nose in the end when Rincewind gave this big speech to Coin about never be who other people you expect you to be, always remember who you are. And I was like, okay, you're kind of pushing the theme a bit, you could have left it with how it was before and I would have seen what you were trying to get across. So that was a minor thing though. I did enjoy the themes, and because I'm usually quite dumb and don't spot themes, I was like, wow, I'm noticing themes, and that's probably because it was really obvious. But there we are, that is my review of Sourcery. And on Goodreads, I gave it 5 stars. I just really liked this book. It's a 5-star read for me. I think that a book can be really... I don't know, I base my star reviews off of my enjoyment rather than the quality of the book. So with more, that is objectively a better book than Sourcery was. But I enjoyed Sourcery far more than I did More, and so I gave More maybe, I think 3.5, 4 stars, whereas this is a 5-star read for me. And so there we are. Okay, so here's a new thing I thought I'd try out. I thought that I'd rank all of the Discworld books that I've read so far and update this every time I read a new one. So I'll quickly talk you through where I've put all these right now, and we'll start with Colour of Magic. So I'm going to put Colour of Magic in B. I thought this was a solid book, and a lot better than a lot of people say it is. I thought it was fun, and it was definitely a good setup for what's to come. It laid the groundwork pretty well, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. So I'm going to put it in B. This is the average. B is going to be the average, and then A and S are where it's like good, really good, and C and D will be bad, and then really bad. So what next? Of course, C, I feel like I don't want to say that ones in C are bad, and no Pratchett book is bad. There are just the weaker ones and the stronger ones. But the C is kind of, the below average of goodness, I suppose. So speaking of C, we're going to stick Light Fantastic in C. I did enjoy this book, and some of my favourite characters like Cohen the Barbarian were in here. But I just felt that I just remember feeling kind of when I finished it. I had kind of bitter feelings towards it. I didn't have, as warm feelings towards it as when I finished the rest of these. So I'm going to stick it in C. Even though I remember not hating all of it. In fact, there was nothing in it that I particularly disliked, but I feel like it was just weaker in terms of plot and characters, so we're going to stick it in there. Next, we've got Equal Rights, which is where a lot of people say the books start to become really good, and I guess I can agree with that, because I'm going to put Equal Rights above the other two, just because I thought the commentary starts to come through in Equal Rights that Terry Pratchett is famous for. Granny Weatherwax was wonderful, and I just thought the story was fun in general and showed parts of the Discworld that hadn't been shown yet. Okay, Mort. Mort is one I feel guilty for. I did not enjoy Mort as much upon my reread as I did the first time, and a lot of people are going to hate me for this, but I don't like it as much as The Colour of Magic. I just thought Mort has some really good bits in, some really, really good bits in, but a lot of the book is really quite average. I just didn't enjoy the middle and parts at the end as much. The middle, I found myself not picking up the book for quite long periods of time on end. Excuse my battery alert, I need to charge this. I should be doing this on a laptop, but I haven't got I don't know how to screen record with audio for that, so I'm going to just stick to the phone but anyway, I just thought the weaker parts in this were really quite weak, and the strong parts in it were really quite strong, and they kind of balance each other out for it to be just below Colour of Magic, which I thought the good parts of which outweighed the negative bits just enough to put it above more. And then we come to Sourcery, which is the most, obviously the most recent one I've read chronologically. I'm going to stick it in A. I really like this book, as I've said. I don't need to go into it anymore. I'm going to put it in A. This was a very good Discworld book. But there are ones that I have read, that I read before I was reading chronologically, that I know I like more than it, and so I'm going to stick those in S. So we're going to start with Reaper Man, which is one of my favourite books of all time. This is the first Discworld book I ever read, and so it's got a special place in my heart. It was just such a surprise for me, and it's just a lovely story. It's got some lovely bits in, so I'm going to stick it in S. Then we've got The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents, which I read for the release of the film, which was quite disappointing, the film. But the book was not. The book was really, really, really good. The tone was marvellous. The way Terry Pratchett explored views on life and death through little, sentient rats was amazing, and I was just taken aback. A lot of my enjoyment of these books comes from me being taken aback. I think when I went into more, I had really high expectations, so maybe that's why I didn't enjoy it as much. Whereas with the rest of these books, because they've got low ratings on Goodreads, I had quite low expectations. I mean, Reaper Man and Maurice certainly don't, but the rest of them, I had quite low expectations. Maybe for Light Fantastic I had higher ones, because I felt so good after Colour of Magic. I thought, oh, that means I'm going to feel the same way about Light Fantastic, and so I expected this to be really good, and then maybe when it wasn't as good, it felt worse for me. But it's all to do with expectation, and I feel like that's a common theme here. But Amazing Maurice is a great book, not as good as Reaper Man, but I think certainly this is a Discworld book that I've recommended and enjoyed the most. Okay, finally we've got the other Death books that I read before I started reading chronologically. So we've got Hogfather here. I had mixed feelings about Hogfather. I'm going to put it in A, below Sourcery. I really liked the good bits of this book, but it did feel a bit clumsily put together, and some parts were quite weak, and so that did hamper my enjoyment quite a lot. But I think the good bits in this were just a bit better than the good bits in Mort. The commentary on Christmas and just everything with death was just delightful, so I'm going to put that in A, below Sourcery, just because I enjoyed Sourcery just that little bit more. And then we've got Soul Music, which is a very, as far as I remember, very kind of average Discworld book for me. I'm not too well versed in the period of music that Pratchett was parodying here, so maybe I'm not the target audience for this. But the story held up on its own, but I felt like some of the humour was lost on me, and so I'm going to put it just below Mort, because I remember more good things about Mort than I do Soul Music. So that's the one that I feel the least strongly about really on this list. Okay, so that is my tier ranking of the Discworld books. I'm going to screenshot this so I can adapt it when I finish Weird Sisters and show it to you. And it'll be interesting to see how this turns out once I finish them all. Okay, so that is my review of Sourcery. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if, for all my Discord viewers on here, if you've got anything to contribute to what I've said, if you have any views on this book, I'd love to hear them. As always, I want to get a conversation going with you all, so if you've got anything to say, anything at all, leave it down there and we can kick it off. Okay, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time where I'll be doing something. Until then, have a good one. Bye!